The funeral flowers had barely wilted when Robert Carlson handed me an eviction notice. 3 weeks after burying my mother, I sat in what had been our family kitchen, staring at the legal document that would force me out of the only home I'd ever known. "I'm sorry, Vicky," Rob said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But this house needs to be sold. The medical bills from your mother's treatment were astronomical." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Denise Palmer, his girlfriend who had somehow materialized the moment Mom's heart monitor flatlined, nodded sympathetically from across the table. Her manicured fingers drummed against the granite countertops Mom had saved 2 years to install. "We know this is hard," she said in that practiced voice real estate agents use when delivering bad news, "but Robert needs to move forward. We both do." I looked at the man who had married my mother 5 years ago, who had promised to love and protect our family through thick and thin. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. Instead, he busied himself with paperwork spread across the dining table, the same table where we had celebrated my high school graduation just 4 years earlier. "What about Kate's Garden Center?" I asked quietly. "Mom spent 15 years building that business." Rob's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The business is struggling, has been since she got sick. Medical expenses, you understand. We'll need to sell that too." His voice carried a finality that made my stomach drop. "I've already spoken with a buyer. They're interested in the property for commercial development." The words hit me like physical blows. Mom's garden center wasn't just a business, it was her life's work, her passion project that she had built from a tiny greenhouse in our backyard into the most successful nursery in Riverside Hills. Every plant, every landscape design, every satisfied customer represented a piece of her soul. And now Rob was planning to bulldoze it for strip mall or parking lot. Where am I supposed to go? The question escaped before I could stop it, and I hated how small my voice sounded. I was 22 years old, halfway through my business degree at Denver State, but in that moment I felt like the scared 8-year-old who had watched her biological father walk out on us 15 years ago. "You're an adult now," Denise interjected before Rob could answer. "College students live in dorms or apartments all the time. This might be exactly what you need. Independence. A fresh start." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Your mother wouldn't want you stuck in the past." The casual way she spoke about my mother's wishes made my hands clench into fists. Denise had known Mom for exactly 3 months, the period between diagnosis confirmation and death. She had swooped into our lives under the guise of helping Rob cope with his grief, bringing casseroles and tissues, all while measuring the windows for new curtains. My name is Victoria Hayes, though everyone calls me Vicky. I'm 22 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who seem to have all the power are actually the ones with the most to lose. Growing up, it was just Mom and me against the world. My biological father, David Hayes, had left when I was 7, deciding that family responsibilities weren't compatible with his dreams of becoming a traveling musician. He sent birthday cards irregularly for a few years, then stopped altogether. Mom never spoke bitterly about him, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes as she worked double shifts at the local nursery to keep us afloat. She had always loved plants and gardening, spending her weekends transforming our tiny backyard into something magical. Neighbors would stop by to ask for advice, and Mom would spend hours helping them plan flower beds and vegetable gardens, never asking for payment. When I was 10, Mom made a decision that would change our lives forever. She used her small savings and a loan against our house to open Kate's Garden Center. It started as barely more than a large greenhouse on a half-acre lot she rented on the outskirts of town. I remember the fear in her voice when she explained that we might have to eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more often, but her eyes sparkled with something I had never seen before: hope. Those early years were tough. Mom worked 7 days a week, arriving at the garden center before dawn and coming home after dark. I learned to make my own breakfast and do my homework at the nursery's small office, surrounded by the gentle hum of grow lights and the sweet scent of jasmine. But slowly, steadily, the business grew. Mom's expertise and genuine care for both plants and people created a loyal customer base. By the time I started high school, Kate's Garden Center was thriving. Mom had expanded to a 3-acre property with multiple greenhouses, a landscaping division, and 6 full-time employees. She had become the go-to expert for garden design in Riverside Hills and the surrounding mountain communities. Wealthy homeowners would drive hours to consult with her about their properties, and she commanded fees that reflected her reputation. That's when Robert Carlson entered our lives. He was an insurance broker who had been hired to update the business policies as Mom expanded her operations. Tall, well-dressed, and charming in that professional way that inspired confidence, Rob seemed like everything my absent father wasn't: stable, dependable, present. He brought flowers to our house, remembered my school events, and made my mother laugh in ways I hadn't heard since before my father left. Their courtship was methodical and respectful. Rob understood that Mom came as a package deal, and he made genuine efforts to connect with me. He taught me to drive in his sedan, helped me with college applications, and even learned the names of Mom's favorite plants so he could surprise her with rare specimens for special occasions. When they married 3 years later, I was genuinely happy for them both. The wedding was small but elegant, held in the garden center's main greenhouse surrounded by Mom's most prized orchids and roses. Rob's family attended from back east, and I served as maid of honor, wearing a dress the same shade of lavender as Mom's favorite clematis vine. In his wedding speech, Rob promised to love and protect our family, to support Mom's dreams, and to never let us face hardship alone. For the first 2 years of their marriage, Rob kept those promises. He helped Mom navigate the business expansion, provided valuable insights about insurance and risk management, and even convinced her to incorporate the business properly to protect our personal assets. He moved into our Victorian house on Maple Grove Avenue, bringing with him a stability and security I had never experienced. But looking back now, I realize there were subtle changes I hadn't noticed at the time. Rob gradually inserted himself into more business decisions, suggesting that Mom was working too hard and needed his help managing the financial aspects of Kate's garden center. He encouraged her to add him as a co-owner on the business accounts, arguing that it would be easier for him to handle banking and vendor relationships while she focused on the creative side. Mom, trusting and exhausted from years of handling everything alone, agreed to most of his suggestions. She was so grateful to have a partner who understood business that she didn't question his motivations. Rob's insurance background made him seem like the perfect person to help navigate the complex financial decisions that came with running a successful enterprise. The first sign of trouble came during my junior year of college. I had come home for spring break and noticed that Mom seemed more tired than usual. She brushed off my concerns, attributing her fatigue to the busy spring season and a demanding new commercial landscaping contract. But when I insisted she see Dr. Walsh for a checkup, the blood tests revealed what we had all feared to consider: Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The diagnosis hit our family like an earthquake, shaking the foundation of everything we thought we understood about our future. Dr. Walsh explained that the cancer was aggressive but treatable, requiring immediate surgery followed by months of chemotherapy. The treatment would be expensive and exhausting, but there was reason for hope. Mom faced her diagnosis with the same determination she had brought to building her business. She researched treatment options, assembled the best medical team she could find, and prepared to fight with everything she had. Rob seemed supportive during those early weeks, driving her to appointments and handling business matters while she focused on her health. But as the treatments progressed and Mom became weaker, I noticed changes in Rob's behavior that troubled me. He began making more unilateral decisions about the business, explaining that Mom was too sick to handle the stress of day-to-day operations. He hired a new bookkeeper without consulting her, changed vendors to companies that offered him better commission deals, and even modified some of the garden center's service offerings. When I questioned these changes during one of my visits home, Rob dismissed my concerns with condescending patience. "Your mother needs to focus on getting better," he said. "I'm doing what's necessary to keep the business running until she's well enough to take control again." His tone suggested that I was being an ungrateful child who didn't understand the complexities of running a business during a crisis. Mom was too weak from chemotherapy to engage in business discussions, and I was too busy managing my college coursework and part-time job to fully investigate what was happening. I trusted that Rob, as her husband and business partner, had her best interests at heart. It seemed logical that someone needed to step up and handle the practical matters while she fought for her life. During Mom's final month, when it became clear that the treatments weren't working, she spent most of her time in the hospital. Rob was there every day, playing the role of devoted husband perfectly. He brought her favorite flowers from the garden center, read to her when she was too weak to hold books, and held her hand during the difficult conversations with doctors about end-of-life care. I watched him comfort her during those last weeks, and felt grateful that she had someone who loved her so completely. When she died on a Tuesday morning in October, with autumn light streaming through the hospital windows, Rob seemed genuinely devastated. He handled the funeral arrangements with careful attention to what Mom would have wanted, choosing flowers from her own greenhouses, and ensuring that the service reflected her love of beauty and growing things. The funeral was packed with customers, employees, and community members whose lives had been touched by Mom's kindness and expertise. Person after person shared stories of how she had helped them create beautiful spaces, solve gardening challenges, or simply offered encouragement during difficult times. Rob delivered a eulogy that brought tears to everyone's eyes, speaking eloquently about Mom's passion for helping things grow and flourish. In the immediate aftermath of her death, Rob seemed like a man overwhelmed by grief and responsibility. He assured me that we would figure everything out together, that Mom would have wanted us to take care of each other. He suggested I take time off from school to process my grief, offering to cover my expenses, so I wouldn't have to worry about financial pressures during this difficult period. But within 2 weeks of the funeral, everything changed. Rob's supportive demeanor shifted to something colder and more businesslike. He began making comments about the financial realities we faced, suggesting that Mom's medical bills had been more extensive than anyone realized.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He produced stacks of paperwork showing debts and expenses that seemed impossibly large for a business that had been thriving just months before. That's when Denise Palmer appeared in our lives. Rob introduced her as a family friend who was helping him navigate the complex process of settling Mom's estate. She was polished and professional, speaking knowledgeably about real estate values and market conditions. Her presence felt intrusive, but Rob insisted that we needed expert guidance to make the best decisions for our family's future. Denise's initial assessment of our situation was grim. According to her analysis, the combination of medical debts, business loans, and property taxes had created a financial crisis that required immediate action. The house would need to be sold to pay creditors, and the garden center wasn't generating enough income to justify keeping it operational. Her recommendations were presented with sympathetic efficiency, as if she genuinely regretted having to deliver such difficult news. I felt like I was drowning in information I couldn't fully process or verify. Rob and Denise presented spreadsheets and legal documents that painted a picture of financial ruin, but something felt wrong about their conclusions. Mom had always been careful with money, and the business had seemed successful right up until she became ill. The numbers they were showing me didn't match my understanding of our family's financial situation. But I was 22 years old, grieving the loss of my mother, and facing the prospect of losing everything else I had ever cared about. Rob had legal authority as Mom's widower and business partner, and Denise had professional credentials that gave weight to her recommendations. Who was I to question their expertise or challenge their assessment of our situation? The eviction notice was presented as a necessary evil, a legal formality that would allow Rob to move forward with selling the house and using the proceeds to settle debts. He explained that I could stay in the house until it sold, probably another month or two, but that I should start looking for alternative living arrangements. He even offered to help me find an affordable apartment near campus and to provide some financial assistance as I transitioned to independent living. Sitting in that kitchen, holding legal papers that would force me from my childhood home, I felt completely powerless. Everything I had assumed about my future had been built on the foundation of Mom's business and our family home. Without those anchors, I was adrift in a world that suddenly seemed hostile and uncertain. Rob continued reviewing his paperwork, occasionally glancing up to offer additional explanations or reassurances. He spoke about the necessity of making difficult decisions, about protecting the family's financial future, about what Mom would have wanted in these circumstances. His words sounded reasonable and caring, but they felt hollow against the reality of what was happening. Denise contributed periodic observations about market conditions and timing, emphasizing that we were fortunate to be selling during a favorable real estate cycle. She had already identified potential buyers for both the house and the garden center property, people who were prepared to move quickly and pay fair market value. Her efficiency would have been admirable under different circumstances, but it felt predatory, given how recently we had buried my mother. As I sat there trying to process the magnitude of what I was losing, I found myself thinking about all the conversations I had shared with Mom over the years about plans and dreams, and the future she was building for us. She had often talked about her hopes that I might someday take over the business, combining my business education with her horticultural expertise to expand Kate's Garden Center even further. Those conversations seemed like fantasies now, impossible dreams that had died along with the woman who had inspired them. But even as I acknowledged the reality of my situation, something inside me rebelled against the idea that everything Mom had built would simply disappear. Her legacy deserved better than being reduced to line items on a financial statement. I folded the eviction notice carefully and placed it in my purse, meeting Rob's eyes for the first time since he had handed it to me. "I understand," I said quietly. "You need to do what you think is best." My voice carried none of the fight he might have expected, none of the emotional protest that would have been natural for someone my age facing such devastating losses. Rob seemed almost surprised by my calm acceptance. He had probably prepared arguments and justifications for the inevitable pushback, but I gave him none of that. Instead, I stood up from the kitchen table, thanked them both for their honesty, and excused myself to go pack my belongings. They watched me leave with expressions that might have been relief or concern. I didn't care enough to determine which. In my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories and mementos of a life that was ending, I began the process of deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. The task felt both monumental and meaningless, as if I was trying to compress 22 years of identity into whatever would fit in my college dorm room. But as I worked, I found myself thinking, not about what I was losing, but about what Mom would have expected me to do in these circumstances. She had raised me to be strong, independent, and resourceful. She had taught me that setbacks were temporary, and that persistence could overcome almost any obstacle. As I packed my clothes and books and photographs, I began to wonder if she had prepared me for this moment in ways I didn't yet understand. The thought gave me comfort, even as everything familiar disappeared around me. The next morning, I moved out of the house on Maple Grove Avenue, with nothing but my car packed full of personal belongings. Rob had offered to help, but I declined, preferring to handle the transition on my own terms. As I drove away from the Victorian house that had sheltered my entire childhood, I caught a glimpse of Denise in the front window, already measuring spaces with her practiced real estate agent's eye. I found a small studio apartment near campus that I could afford with my part-time job income, and the modest savings account Mom had helped me establish for emergencies. The space was cramped and impersonal, furnished with hand-me-down furniture from other students, but it was mine. For the first time in weeks, I could think clearly without Rob and Denise hovering nearby with their constant updates about financial pressures and necessary decisions. The grief counselor at the University Health Center had warned me that losing a parent would affect my academic performance, but I threw myself into my studies with renewed intensity. My business courses suddenly felt more relevant and urgent. Classes on corporate finance, contract law, and business ethics took on new meaning, as I tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. During quiet moments between classes, I found myself replaying conversations with Mom from her final months. She had been heavily medicated and often confused, but there were lucid periods when she seemed almost urgent about certain topics. She had repeatedly asked me about my business classes, wanting detailed updates on what I was learning about corporate structures and legal protections. At the time, I had assumed she was simply trying to stay connected to my life despite her illness. But now I wondered if those conversations had been more purposeful than I had realized. Mom had always been strategic in her thinking, planning several moves ahead like a chess player anticipating her opponent's responses. Even during her sickest periods, she had insisted on reviewing business documents and meeting with her lawyer, Mr. Thomas Brennan, who had helped her establish the Garden Center's corporate structure years earlier. Rob had been present for most of those meetings, positioned as the supportive husband helping his wife manage difficult decisions during her illness. But thinking back, I realized that Mom had also requested several private sessions with Mr. Brennan, meetings that Rob had mentioned only in passing, describing them as routine legal housekeeping related to her will and estate planning. 3 weeks into my new living situation, I received a call that changed everything. Linda Morrison, Mom's oldest friend, and former business partner from the early days of the Garden Center, asked to meet me for coffee. Linda had been notably absent from the funeral, and the subsequent family discussions about our financial situation, which had seemed odd given her close relationship with Mom. We met at a small cafe downtown, away from campus and the areas where Rob or Denise might unexpectedly appear. Linda looked tired and worried, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something more serious and urgent. She ordered coffee but barely touched it, instead spending several minutes studying my face as if trying to determine whether I could be trusted with whatever she had come to tell me. Your mother was worried about Rob, Linda said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to burden you with her concerns while you were dealing with her illness, but she asked me to watch out for you after she was gone. The words sent a chill through me, confirming suspicions I had barely allowed myself to acknowledge. Linda explained that Mom had confided her growing concerns about Rob's involvement in the business during the final months of her illness. While he presented himself as a devoted husband trying to help manage during a crisis, Mom had begun noticing discrepancies in financial reports and unauthorized changes to vendor relationships that benefited Rob personally, rather than the garden center. She was too sick to investigate thoroughly. Linda continued, but she wasn't too sick to plan. Your mother was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, and she knew she was running out of time to protect what she had built for you. The intensity in Linda's voice made it clear that this conversation was not casual concern, but something much more serious and urgent. Mom had apparently spent her final weeks putting protective measures in place, working with Mr. Brennan on legal strategies that would safeguard the business and property from potential misconduct. She had been careful to keep these efforts hidden from Rob, conducting meetings and communications through Linda and other trusted allies who could act on her behalf without arousing suspicion. But Linda's most shocking revelation was about the extent of Rob's deception. Through her own investigation, prompted by Mom's concerns, Linda had discovered that Rob had been systematically siphoning money from the garden center for months before Mom's death. He had established relationships with vendors who kicked back portions of their contracts to him personally, created fake consulting fees for insurance services that were never provided, and even taken loans against the business assets without Mom's knowledge or consent. The financial crisis he's describing to you doesn't exist, Linda said, leaning across the small cafe table. Kate's garden center is profitable and debt-free. Your mother's medical bills were covered by insurance, and the business has substantial cash reserves that Rob has been hiding from you. The words hit me like physical blows, confirming that everything Rob and Denise had told me was elaborate fiction designed to justify stealing everything Mom had built. Linda reached into her purse and withdrew a sealed envelope with my name written in Mom's distinctive handwriting. She asked me to give this to you exactly 1 month after the funeral. Linda explained. She said you would need time to process her death before you could handle what comes next, but that you shouldn't wait too long to act. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, recognizing Mom's careful script on several pages of legal documents and personal notes. The first page was a letter addressed to me, written in the clear, decisive tone I remembered from her business correspondence. As I read her words, I realized that she had known exactly what Rob was planning, and had prepared countermeasures that would protect everything she valued. The letter explained that Mom had discovered Rob's financial misconduct during her illness, but had chosen not to confront him directly. Instead, she had worked with Mr. Brennan to create legal protections that would preserve the business and property for me, while giving Rob enough rope to hang himself with his own greed and deception. Her plan required patience and strategic thinking, but it would ultimately expose Rob's crimes and restore what rightfully belonged to our family. Mom had restructured the business ownership during her final weeks, transferring her shares to a trust that would vest to me on my 23rd birthday, just 6 months away. She had also created detailed documentation of Rob's unauthorized activities, working with Linda and other trusted employees to gather evidence that would support criminal charges if necessary. Most importantly, she had ensured that Rob's authority over the business was limited and temporary, despite his assumptions about his rights as her widower. The legal documents in the envelope outlined a complex strategy that would unfold over several months, designed to give Rob enough opportunity to incriminate himself further while protecting the core assets from any damage he might attempt. Mom had anticipated his likely moves and prepared responses that would turn his own actions against him. But the most surprising element of Mom's plan was her assessment of my capabilities and readiness to handle the challenge ahead. She had recognized that my business education, combined with the practical knowledge I had gained from years of watching her manage the garden center, had prepared me to understand and execute sophisticated legal and financial strategies. Her letter expressed complete confidence in my ability to reclaim what Rob was trying to steal. Reading her words, I felt a mixture of grief and determination that was unlike anything I had experienced before. Mom had faced her final weeks knowing that she was leaving me in a dangerous situation, but she had also trusted me enough to provide the tools and information I would need to protect myself. Her faith in my strength and intelligence was both humbling and empowering. Linda watched me read the documents, occasionally providing clarification about technical details or explaining how certain pieces of evidence had been gathered. She had been Mom's closest ally in this effort, using her position as a former business partner and current friend to monitor Rob's activities and document his misconduct without arousing suspicion. "Your mother loved you more than anything in the world," Linda said as I finished reading the final page. "She knew that losing her would be devastating, but she also knew that you had the intelligence and determination to handle whatever came next. This plan she's created, it's not just about protecting the business, it's about proving to yourself that you're capable of anything." The documents included detailed financial records showing the true state of Kate's garden center, which was not only profitable but actually more successful than it had been before Mom's illness. Rob's claims about medical debts and business struggles were completely fabricated, supported by falsified records that he had created to justify his planned theft of the family assets. Mom had also gathered evidence of Rob's personal relationship with Denise, which had begun months before Mom's death and involved detailed planning for how they would divide and liquidate the family assets once she was gone. Their relationship was not a grief-stricken widower finding comfort with a helpful friend, but a calculated partnership between two people planning to profit from a dying woman's legacy. The scope of their deception was breathtaking in its callousness and greed. While Mom lay dying in the hospital, Rob and Denise had been meeting regularly to discuss their plans for the house, the business, and how to minimize any claims I might have on the estate. They had researched legal strategies for limiting my inheritance, consulted with real estate agents about property values, and even discussed how to handle my potential objections to their decisions. Linda showed me copies of text messages and emails that Mom's lawyer had obtained through legal discovery processes, revealing conversations between Rob and Denise that were shocking in their casual cruelty. They had discussed me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a grieving daughter who deserved consideration and support. Their plans included psychological manipulation designed to make me believe that accepting their version of events was my only option. But Mom had anticipated their strategies and prepared responses that would turn their own deception against them. The legal framework she had created would allow them to proceed with their plans just far enough to establish clear evidence of fraud and theft, at which point the true ownership structure would be revealed and their criminal liability would be undeniable. As Linda walked me through the details of Mom's plan, I began to understand the elegant complexity of what she had created. Every document Rob had shown me, every financial statement Denise had used to justify their decisions, had been carefully crafted to give them false confidence while preserving legal protections that they didn't know existed. The plan would require me to continue appearing defeated and compliant for several more weeks, allowing Rob and Denise to proceed with their intended fraud while gathering additional evidence of their criminal intent. Mom had recognized that my natural tendency to trust people and avoid conflict would make this performance challenging, but she had also provided detailed guidance about how to protect myself emotionally during this difficult period. Most importantly, Mom had ensured that I would not be facing this challenge alone. She had created a network of allies who understood the situation and were prepared to provide support when the time came to act. Mr. Brennan would handle the legal aspects, Linda would manage the business operations, and several other trusted friends and employees were ready to provide testimony about Rob's misconduct. Walking back to my apartment after the meeting with Linda, I felt as if I was seeing the world clearly for the first time in months. The grief and confusion that had clouded my thinking since Mom's death were replaced by a sense of purpose and determination that reminded me of how she had approached business challenges throughout my childhood. Rob had counted on my youth and inexperience to make me an easy victim, but he had underestimated both my capabilities and the woman who had raised me. Mom had spent my entire life preparing me for independence and success, and her final gift was the opportunity to prove that her faith in me was justified. That evening, I called Rob to thank him for his patience during my adjustment period and to let him know that I was ready to cooperate fully with his plans for settling Mom's estate. I could hear the relief in his voice as he assured me that he was handling everything in the most responsible way possible, protecting the family's interests while dealing with difficult financial realities. I played the role of the grateful stepdaughter perfectly, expressing appreciation for his guidance and acknowledging that I had been too overwhelmed by grief to fully understand the challenges he was facing. Rob seemed pleased by my newfound maturity and cooperation, probably believing that his manipulation had successfully convinced me to accept his version of events without further resistance. But as I hung up the phone, I was already thinking several moves ahead, just as Mom had taught me to do when facing any significant challenge. Rob and Denise had made their opening moves in a game they thought they were playing alone, but they were about to discover that they had been outmaneuvered by a woman who had never lost a strategic battle in her life. The next phase of Mom's plan would require careful timing and flawless execution, but I was ready for everything that lay ahead. I had spent my entire life watching her turn challenges into opportunities, and now I would have the chance to honor her memory by protecting everything she had built. Rob had made the mistake of believing that a grieving 22-year-old would be easy to manipulate and control, but he was about to learn that Catherine Hayes had raised her daughter to be much stronger and smarter than anyone expected. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained my performance as the compliant stepdaughter while carefully implementing the next stages of Mom's plan. I attended meetings with Rob and Denise about the house sale, nodding agreement to their proposals while internally cataloging every lie they told and every document they falsified. Their confidence grew with each interaction, making them careless about concealing evidence of their fraud. Linda kept me updated on the business situation, reporting that Rob was accelerating his theft of garden center assets now that he believed I had accepted his authority over the estate. He was liquidating inventory at below-market prices to companies that provided him kickbacks, transferring cash reserves to accounts he controlled personally, and even negotiating to sell the property to developers who had offered him personal incentives beyond the official purchase price. But every transaction Rob made was actually providing additional evidence for the criminal case that would eventually be filed against him. Mom's legal framework allowed him to believe he had authority for these actions while actually documenting his fraud in ways that would be impossible to dispute in court. He was literally creating the evidence that would send him to prison. The most challenging aspect of maintaining my facade was watching Rob and Denise celebrate their anticipated windfall while speaking sympathetically about the difficult decisions they were making for the family's benefit. They had convinced themselves that they were justified in their theft, creating elaborate rationalizations about how Mom would have wanted them to move forward together and how my youth made me unsuitable for managing substantial assets. But I knew that everything was about to change, and that knowledge gave me the strength to endure their condescension and false sympathy. Mom had timed her plan perfectly, accounting for the legal processes that would be required and the psychological dynamics that would drive Rob's behavior. In just a few more weeks, the trap she had set would spring shut, and everyone would learn the truth about who had really been in control all along. The hardest part was pretending to be grateful. Every morning I forced myself to call Rob with updates about my apartment search and my progress adjusting to independent living. He seemed genuinely pleased by what he interpreted as my maturation and acceptance of adult responsibilities. His voice carried the satisfied tone of someone who believed his careful manipulation had achieved its intended result. "I'm proud of how you're handling all this, Vicky," he said during one of our daily conversations. "Your mother always worried that she was too protective, that she hadn't prepared you for real-world challenges. But look at how well you're adapting. She would be so proud." His words were designed to reinforce the narrative he had created, positioning himself as the wise stepfather helping me navigate difficult circumstances. I responded with exactly the gratitude he expected, thanking him for his patience and guidance during such a challenging time. "I know this hasn't been easy for you either," I said, injecting just enough emotion into my voice to sound sincere. "Having to manage everything while dealing with your own grief. I really appreciate how you've protected me from the worst of the financial stress." These conversations became easier as I began to understand them as performance rather than genuine communication. Rob needed to believe that his deception was successful, and my apparent acceptance of his version of events was crucial for the larger plan Mom had designed. Each expression of gratitude and each acknowledgement of his authority provided him with more confidence to proceed with increasingly brazen theft. Denise had become a regular presence in these conversations, often taking the phone to offer her own insights about the real estate market and the wisdom of moving quickly to resolve our financial difficulties. Her professional demeanor had evolved into something more familiar and presumptuous, as if she had already assumed the role of family advisor and was graciously sharing her expertise with a grateful stepdaughter. "The market is really strong right now," she explained during one call, her voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of someone accustomed to closing difficult sales. "We're seeing multiple offers on properties like yours, sometimes above asking price. If we can get the house listed in the next 2 weeks, you'll have more money to work with as you start your independent life." I listened to her projections and timelines with appropriate interest, asking the naive questions she expected from someone my age who had never dealt with real estate transactions. Her answers revealed much more than she intended, including details about buyers who had already expressed interest and commission structures that seemed unusually favorable to her personally, rather than to the estate she claimed to be representing. The house sale preparations provided numerous opportunities to document Rob's fraudulent activities. When he asked me to sign documents transferring certain personal property rights, I carefully reviewed everything with the legal knowledge I had gained from my business courses. The paperwork was designed to appear routine while actually giving him authority over assets that should have remained in my control. But thanks to Mom's preparations, I knew that these documents would actually provide evidence of Rob's intent to defraud, rather than granting him the authority he believed he was obtaining. Mom had worked with Mr. Brennan to create legal structures that made Rob's signatures on falsified documents into criminal evidence rather than valid property transfers. The most challenging aspect of this performance was watching Rob systematically dismantle everything Mom had built at the garden center. He had convinced the staff that the business was facing financial difficulties and that cost-cutting measures were necessary to prevent total collapse. Several longtime employees had already been laid off, ostensibly to reduce payroll expenses during the transition period. Linda provided me with daily updates about the garden center operations, reporting how Rob was liquidating valuable inventory and equipment at far below market value. He had established relationships with wholesale buyers who were purchasing rare plants and specialty tools for fractions of their actual worth, with kickbacks flowing directly to accounts he controlled, rather than to the business. The customers who had built their relationships with Mom over years of careful service were being treated as inconveniences rather than valuable assets. Rob had implemented new policies that prioritized quick sales over the personalized advice and long-term relationships that had made Kate's Garden Center successful. Many loyal customers were taking their business elsewhere, but Rob seemed unconcerned about the long-term damage to the company's reputation. He's acting like someone who knows he won't be running the business for very long, Linda observed during one of our careful phone conversations. Everything he's doing suggests that he's planning to extract maximum value in minimum time, regardless of what it does to the company's future viability. This short-term thinking was exactly what Mom had predicted in her letters. She had understood that Rob's greed would make him impatient and careless, leading him to take actions that would provide clear evidence of his criminal intent while destroying his own credibility as a legitimate business manager. The property sale negotiations revealed even more about Rob and Denise's true relationship and intentions. They had been working together for months to identify potential buyers and structure deals that would maximize their personal benefit rather than the estate's value. Denise had connections with developers who were interested in the garden center's prime location for commercial projects that would generate substantial profits. But their most revealing mistake was the casual way they discussed their shared future during conversations they assumed I couldn't overhear. When I visited the house to collect additional personal items, I heard them planning how they would invest the proceeds from the property sales and discussing where they wanted to live once everything was finalized. Once we get through the probate process and close on both properties, we'll have enough to put down on that place in Aspen we looked at, Denise said, her voice carrying excitement about prospects that clearly had nothing to do with settling Mom's estate responsibly. The real estate market there is just going to keep growing, and will be positioned perfectly. Rob's response revealed the extent of their joint planning and their complete disregard for any obligations he might have had to my welfare or to honoring Mom's intentions. I've been conservative in what I've told Vicky about the debt situation, he said. There's actually going to be more left over than she realizes, but she doesn't need to know that. She's young and resilient. This will be good for her character. Their casual dismissal of my legitimate interests was infuriating, but it also provided exactly the type of evidence that would be crucial for the criminal case Mom had prepared. Every conversation I overheard was another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves through their own greed and arrogance. The timeline Mom had established was approaching its crucial phase. According to her letters, Rob would need approximately 6 weeks after her death to commit enough provable crimes to ensure serious criminal charges and civil liability. She had calculated this time frame based on her understanding of his personality and his likely response to the opportunity she was giving him to incriminate himself. During week 5 of this process, Rob made the mistake that would ultimately seal his fate. Believing that he had successfully secured my cooperation and eliminated any potential challenges to his authority, He attempted to liquidate the garden center's most valuable asset, Maïs de l'Est, a collection of rare orchids that Mom had cultivated over 15 years and that were worth more than $50,000 to serious collectors. The orchid collection was Mom's pride and joy, representing not just financial value but also her expertise and passion for horticulture. Each plant had been carefully selected and nurtured, with some specimens being irreplaceable due to their age and rarity. Rob's decision to sell them demonstrated both his complete ignorance about their true value and his willingness to destroy anything that might complicate his theft. But Linda had been monitoring all of Rob's activities, and the attempted sale of the orchids triggered the next phase of Mom's plan. As the legal owner of these plants through structures Rob didn't understand, Linda was able to document his attempt to sell stolen property while also preserving the collection from damage or loss. The buyer Rob had found was a private collector from California who specialized in acquiring rare specimens through questionable channels. This individual had a history of purchasing valuable plants without carefully verifying ownership, making him the perfect person to provide evidence of Rob's willingness to engage in fraudulent sales. Linda alerted Mr. Brennan about the planned transaction, and arrangements were made to document Rob's criminal intent while preventing actual transfer of the orchids. The legal framework Mom had created allowed her allies to intervene at exactly the right moment to maximize the evidence value while protecting the assets themselves. When the California collector arrived to inspect the orchids, he was unknowingly participating in a carefully orchestrated sting operation that would provide video and audio evidence of Rob's fraudulent sales pitch. Rob confidently represented himself as the legal owner of the plants and negotiated a price that was far below their actual value, demonstrating both his criminal intent and his ignorance about what he was trying to steal. The collector agreed to purchase 12 of the most valuable specimens for $25,000, approximately half of their actual worth. But when he attempted to complete the transaction, he discovered that the plants were encumbered by legal restrictions that prevented their sale. The documentation of this failed transaction provided perfect evidence of Rob's criminal activity while protecting the orchids from actual theft. Rob's reaction to this setback revealed much about his character and intentions. Rather than acknowledging any uncertainty about his legal authority, he became angry and demanding, insisting that he had complete ownership rights and threatening legal action against anyone who interfered with his business decisions. This response was captured on recording devices that Linda had placed in the garden center with Mr. Brennan's guidance, providing clear audio evidence of Rob's fraudulent claims and his willingness to use intimidation when his authority was challenged. His threats against Linda and other employees would become additional criminal charges in the case that was building against him. But Rob's most damaging mistake was his decision to forge documents in an attempt to complete the orchid sale. When the legitimate legal restrictions prevented the transaction, he created falsified ownership papers that misrepresented his authority and contained his forged signature on documents he knew to be fraudulent. These forged documents were exactly what Mom had anticipated he would create when faced with challenges to his assumed authority. She had predicted that his greed and arrogance would lead him to commit increasingly serious crimes rather than accept limitations on his theft, and her prediction proved accurate in every detail. The forgery attempt provided the final piece of evidence needed to move forward with criminal charges. Rob had now committed multiple felonies in his effort to steal family assets, and every crime had been carefully documented through the legal framework Mom had established before her death. As week 6 began, I maintained my performance as the grateful stepdaughter while internally preparing for the confrontation that would reveal the truth about everything that had been happening. Mom's plan was entering its final phase, and soon everyone would understand who had really been in control throughout this entire process. Rob continued to treat me with condescending kindness, believing that his manipulation had been completely successful and that I posed no threat to his plans. His confidence had grown to the point where he barely bothered to maintain pretenses about his motivations, speaking openly about his plans for the money and property he believed he was stealing. "You're going to be fine, Vicky," he assured me during our last conversation before the truth was revealed. "This experience is going to make you stronger and more independent. Your mother always said you were capable of more than you realized, and now you'll have the chance to prove it." His words carried cruel irony that he couldn't possibly understand, but that I appreciated fully. In just a few more days, Rob would discover that Mom had indeed been right about my capabilities, and that she had prepared me far better than he had ever imagined. The trap she had set was about to spring shut, and everything he thought he had stolen was about to be returned to its rightful owner through the legal system she had so carefully manipulated in advance. The game was almost over, and Rob had played exactly as Mom had predicted he would. His greed, arrogance, and complete underestimation of the women in his life had led him to commit crimes that would destroy his freedom and his future. Soon everyone would understand that Catherine Hayes had won her final battle from beyond the grave, protecting her daughter and her legacy through the most sophisticated legal strategy of her career. The only question remaining was whether Rob would understand how completely he had been outmaneuvered, or whether his arrogance would prevent him from recognizing the brilliance of the woman who had defeated him even after her death. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning exactly 7 weeks after Mom's funeral. Mr. Thomas Brennan's secretary asked if I could attend an urgent meeting regarding my mother's estate, scheduled for that afternoon at 2 o'clock. Her tone was professionally neutral, giving no indication of what had prompted this sudden request, but I knew exactly what was happening. Rob called me 30 minutes later, confusion evident in his voice. "Did you get a call from that lawyer?" he asked. "Something about an estate meeting. I thought we had everything settled already." His bewilderment was genuine. He truly believed that his theft had been so successful that no legal complications could possibly arise. "Maybe it's just paperwork," I suggested, maintaining the naive tone he expected from me. "You know how lawyers are about documentation. I'm sure it's nothing important." My casual dismissal seemed to reassure him, reinforcing his belief that I was too inexperienced to understand complex legal proceedings. "You're probably right," Rob agreed. "These estate lawyers always find ways to drag things out and generate more fees. We'll get through it quickly and then put all this behind us." His confidence remained unshaken, even when faced with unexpected legal developments that should have concerned any rational person who had been committing systematic fraud. I arrived at Brennan & Associates 20 minutes early, using the extra time to review Mom's letters one final time. Her instructions for this phase had been precise and detailed, accounting for every likely scenario, and providing guidance about how to handle Rob's reactions when he finally understood what had been happening. The law office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with panoramic views of the Colorado mountains. Mr. Brennan had represented Mom for over a decade, helping her navigate the legal complexities of building and expanding her business. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who specialized in estate planning and business law, with a reputation for meticulous preparation and strategic thinking that had made him Mom's trusted advisor. When I entered his office, I found Linda Morrison already seated at the conference table, along with 2 other people I didn't immediately recognize. Mr. Brennan introduced them as Dr. Patricia Walsh, who had been Mom's primary physician during her illness, and Mr. Jonathan Rivers, the bank manager who had handled the Garden Center's financial accounts for the past 5 years. "We're waiting for Mr. Carlson and his representative," Mr. Brennan explained, gesturing for me to take a seat at the table. "Once they arrive, we can begin reviewing some important matters related to your mother's estate that have come to our attention." His formal tone provided no hint about what was coming, but the presence of so many witnesses suggested that this meeting would be far more significant than Rob anticipated. Rob arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, accompanied by Denise Palmer, who had apparently appointed herself as his advisor for legal matters. They entered the conference room with the casual confidence of people attending a routine administrative meeting, expecting to handle minor paperwork before returning to their plans for liquidating the remaining family assets. "Good afternoon, everyone," Rob said, settling into his chair with relaxed authority. "I appreciate you accommodating our schedules for this meeting. Vicky and I are eager to finalize everything so we can move forward with our lives." His reference to our lives reinforced the narrative he had created about protecting my interests while managing difficult family circumstances. Denise spread several folders across the table, apparently prepared to discuss real estate transactions and property valuations. "We've made excellent progress on both the house sale and the Garden Center liquidation," she announced. "The market timing couldn't be better, and we should be able to close everything within the next 2 weeks." Mr. Brennan listened to their updates with polite attention, occasionally making notes, but offering no comments about their plans or timelines. When they finished their presentation, he opened his own folder and withdrew a stack of legal documents that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "Before we discuss any property transactions," Mr. Brennan said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "there are some matters regarding the estate structure that need to be clarified. Specifically, there appear to be some misunderstandings about ownership and authority that we need to resolve." Rob's expression shifted slightly, the first hint of concern creeping into his previously confident demeanor. "What kind of misunderstandings?" he asked. "I'm Catherine's widower and the legal heir to her estate. The will was perfectly clear about that." "Actually, Mr. Brennan replied, withdrawing a thick document from his folder, "your wife's will was quite specific about certain limitations on inheritance rights, particularly regarding business assets and property that had been placed in trust structures prior to her death.
He placed the document on the table where everyone could see it, the official seals and signatures clearly visible. The will Mr. Brennan presented was not the simple document Rob had assumed existed. Instead, it was a comprehensive legal instrument that had been prepared during Mom's final weeks, incorporating complex trust structures and conditional inheritances that protected the most valuable assets from any potential misconduct by surviving family members. "I don't understand," Denise said, leaning forward to examine the document. "This isn't what we were told about the estate structure. Where did this come from?" Her professional composure was beginning to crack as she realized that her assumptions about the legal situation had been completely wrong. Mr.
Brennan explained that Mom had executed this revised will during her final month of life, working with him and other legal professionals to create protections that would ensure her wishes were honored regardless of any actions taken by her survivors. The will had been properly witnessed and filed, superseding any earlier documents that might have suggested a simpler inheritance structure. Catherine was very concerned about the financial pressures that medical expenses might create, Mr. Brennan continued, his tone remaining professionally neutral while delivering information that was systematically destroying Rob's assumptions. She wanted to ensure that the business and property would be protected from any hasty decisions made during the grief process. The trust structure Mom had created was elegant in its complexity. The garden center had been transferred to an irrevocable trust with me as the primary beneficiary effective immediately upon her death. Rob had never actually gained ownership of the business, despite his assumptions and the authority he had exercised over its operations. Similarly, the family home had been placed in a separate trust that granted Rob lifetime occupancy rights but prevented him from selling the property without the consent of the other trust beneficiaries. All of his negotiations with real estate agents and potential buyers had been based on authority he didn't actually possess. "This is ridiculous," Rob said, his voice rising as he began to understand the implications of what he was hearing. "I'm her husband. I have legal rights that can't be overridden by some last-minute document created when she was dying and probably not thinking clearly." Dr. Walsh spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice calm and authoritative. "I can assure you that Catherine was mentally competent and fully aware of her decisions throughout the period when these legal documents were prepared. I evaluated her cognitive function regularly as part of her medical care, and my records document her clarity and decision-making capacity." The medical records Dr. Walsh presented showed detailed assessments of Mom's mental state during her final weeks, including specific evaluations conducted on the days when she had signed the legal documents. These records would prevent any challenge to the will based on claims of diminished capacity or undue influence. But Mr. Brennan wasn't finished with his revelations. He withdrew another set of documents that immediately commanded everyone's attention. Detailed financial records showing the true state of the garden center's accounts and Rob's unauthorized activities over the previous months. During the preparation of the estate documents, Mr. Brennan explained, Catherine asked us to conduct a comprehensive audit of the business finances. What we discovered was quite troubling and led to additional protective measures being incorporated into the trust structure. The financial audit revealed every aspect of Rob's theft in devastating detail. Bank records showed unauthorized transfers to accounts he controlled, vendor payments that had been redirected to benefit him personally, and asset sales that had generated kickbacks rather than legitimate business income. The documentation was so thorough that even a casual observer could understand the scope and systematic nature of his criminal activity. Mr. Rivers, the bank manager, provided additional context about the financial irregularities that had been discovered during the audit. "We became concerned when Mr. Carlson began making unusual requests for account access and transaction approvals that didn't follow the established business procedures," he explained. "When Mrs. Hayes asked us to review everything, we found numerous transactions that appeared to be unauthorized and potentially fraudulent. The bank's investigation had uncovered Rob's creation of fake vendor relationships, falsified invoices for services never provided, and even forged signatures on documents that authorized large cash withdrawals. Every crime had been documented with the precision that financial institutions bring to fraud investigations, creating an evidentiary record that would be impossible to dispute." Rob's face had turned pale as the extent of his exposure became clear. "You can't prove any of this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I had Catherine's permission for all of those transactions. She asked me to handle the business affairs when she became too sick to manage them herself." Linda Morrison spoke for the first time, her voice steady and determined. "Actually, Robert, Catherine documented every conversation she had with you about business matters. She was very careful to record exactly what authority she had given you and what decisions she had specifically reserved for herself. Linda opened her own folder and withdrew a collection of audio recordings and written notes that Mom had maintained throughout her illness. The recordings were devastating. Mom's voice, weak but clear, could be heard specifically limiting Rob's authority and expressing concerns about irregularities she had discovered in the business accounts. She had documented his requests for increased access and her refusal to grant certain permissions, creating a clear record that contradicted his claims about having blanket authorization for his activities. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. Mr. Brennan produced photographs and documents related to Rob's recent attempt to sell the orchid collection, including the forged ownership papers he had created when legitimate restrictions prevented the transaction. "This brings us to more serious matters," Mr. Brennan said, his tone becoming grave. "The attempted sale of the orchid collection involved the creation of fraudulent documents and misrepresentation of ownership rights. These actions constitute criminal fraud, and we have a legal obligation to report them to law enforcement." The forged documents were displayed for everyone to examine, with Rob's signature clearly visible on papers that falsely claimed he had legal authority to sell plants that belonged to the trust. Expert handwriting analysis had confirmed that the signatures were genuine, proving that Rob had knowingly created fraudulent documents in his attempt to complete the illegal sale. Denise had been silent for several minutes, apparently trying to process the legal catastrophe that was unfolding around her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of its earlier confidence. "I had no knowledge of any irregularities," she said. "I was simply providing real estate advice based on the information Robert provided to me." Mr. Brennan consulted his notes before responding. "Unfortunately, Miss Palmer, our investigation suggests that your involvement may have been more substantial than that. We have documentation of communications between you and Mr. Carlson that occurred before Catherine's death, discussing plans for property disposition and asset liquidation. The communications Mr. Brennan referenced were the text messages and emails that Mom's legal team had obtained through discovery processes, showing that Rob and Denise had been planning their theft for months before Mom's death. Their discussions had included detailed strategies for minimizing my inheritance and maximizing their personal benefit from the estate assets. These communications," Mr. Brennan continued, "suggest that both of you may have engaged in conspiracy to defraud the estate and its beneficiaries. The district attorney's office has been notified, and criminal charges are being prepared." The room fell silent as the full scope of the legal consequences became clear. Rob and Denise were facing not just civil liability for their theft but serious criminal charges that could result in substantial prison sentences. Every action they had taken in pursuit of their fraudulent scheme had been documented and preserved as evidence. Rob made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said desperately. "Catherine was sick and confused. She didn't understand what she was signing. You people took advantage of a dying woman to create these ridiculous complications." Dr. Walsh responded immediately, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades evaluating patient competency. "Mr. Carlson, I have extensive documentation of your wife's mental state throughout her illness. She was not only competent but remarkably clear about her intentions regarding the estate planning. In fact, she specifically expressed concerns about potential misconduct by surviving family members." The medical records Dr. Walsh had brought included notes from conversations where Mom had explicitly discussed her fears about Rob's financial activities and her determination to protect the business and property from any unauthorized disposition. These records would prevent any successful challenge to the legal structures she had created. Mr. Brennan began organizing the documents for distribution to the appropriate authorities. "Mr. Carlson, Miss Palmer, I'm required to inform you that criminal referrals have been filed with the district attorney's office. You should consult with criminal defense attorneys immediately." As the meeting concluded, Rob sat in stunned silence, apparently trying to understand how his carefully planned theft had collapsed so completely. Denise was frantically making notes, probably calculating her potential liability and planning her defense strategy. "But I was thinking about Mom, about how she had anticipated every move Rob would make and prepared responses that turned his own actions against him. She had created a trap so sophisticated that he had provided all the evidence needed to convict himself, while believing that he was successfully stealing everything she had built. The legal proceedings that would follow were largely formalities. Rob's crimes had been so thoroughly documented that conviction was virtually certain, and the trust structures Mom had created would ensure that every stolen asset was recovered and returned to its rightful place. As we left the law office, I realized that Mom's final gift to me wasn't just the protection of our family's assets but the demonstration that intelligence and preparation could triumph over greed and deception. She had taught me that justice doesn't always come immediately, but that patient strategic thinking could ensure that it comes completely. The criminal charges were filed 3 days later. Rob Carlson was arrested at the garden center while attempting to complete one final theft. Loading a truck with expensive landscaping equipment he planned to sell before the legal restrictions could be enforced. The irony was perfect. He was caught red-handed stealing the very assets he had spent weeks claiming were his to dispose of freely. I wasn't present for the arrest, but Linda called me with the details. Rob had apparently believed that the meeting with Mr. Brennan was simply a legal formality that wouldn't prevent him from continuing his liquidation efforts. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality that criminal investigations move quickly once sufficient evidence has been gathered. Denise Palmer was arrested at her real estate office that same afternoon, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering for her role in facilitating the planned asset transfers. The district attorney's office had moved with remarkable efficiency, suggesting that Mom's legal team had prepared their case so thoroughly that prosecution was straightforward. The local newspaper covered the arrests extensively, describing the sophisticated fraud scheme and the legal trap that had exposed it. The story portrayed Mom as a brilliant businesswoman who had protected her legacy through careful planning and strategic thinking, even while facing terminal illness. Rob was described as a predator who had exploited a dying woman's trust to steal everything she had built. Reading the newspaper coverage, I felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness. Mom had achieved total victory against people who had betrayed her trust and threatened everything she valued, but she hadn't lived to see justice served. Her triumph was complete but posthumous, executed by legal mechanisms she had created but couldn't witness in action. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive. Customers who had been disturbed by the changes at Kate's Garden Center during Rob's brief period of control expressed relief that the business would be preserved and operated according to Mom's standards. Several longtime employees who had been laid off by Rob asked to return to their positions, eager to restore the company culture that had made it successful. Within a week of Rob's arrest, I found myself in the unusual position of inheriting not just assets but also the responsibility of managing a business that employed 12 people and served hundreds of customers throughout the region. At 22, I was suddenly the owner of a substantial enterprise that required immediate attention and long-term strategic planning. Linda Morrison became my unofficial advisor during this transition, helping me understand the operational details that Mom had managed and providing context about relationships with vendors, customers, and employees. Her knowledge of the business was encyclopedic, and her loyalty to Mom's vision made her an invaluable guide as I learned to fill shoes that had seemed impossibly large. "Your mother always intended for you to take over eventually," Linda explained during one of our daily planning sessions. "She talked about it constantly during your college years, imagining how you would bring fresh ideas and modern business practices to what she had built. She just didn't expect it to happen under these circumstances." The business recovery was remarkably swift. Once customers learned that Kate's Garden Center was back under legitimate management, sales rebounded quickly. Many people had avoided the nursery during Rob's tenure, disturbed by the changed atmosphere and questionable practices, but they returned eagerly when word spread that operations had been restored to their previous standards. The financial audit revealed that Rob's theft had been substantial but not devastating. His focus on quick liquidation rather than maximizing value had actually limited the damage he could cause, since many of the most valuable assets had been protected by the trust structures Mom had created. The orchid collection alone was worth more than everything he had managed to steal. Recovery of the stolen assets became a straightforward legal process. Rob had been careless about concealing his crimes, making it easy for investigators to trace money and property to their current locations. Most of the cash he had taken was still in accounts that could be frozen and recovered, while physical assets were returned through court orders. The house sale that Rob and Denise had arranged was canceled immediately, with potential buyers being notified that the seller had lacked legal authority for the transaction. The real estate contracts they had negotiated turned out to be worthless, since the trust structure prevented any sale without proper authorization from the actual property owners. Denise's real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of her criminal trial, effectively ending her career in an industry that requires trust and credibility. Her involvement in the conspiracy had been documented so thoroughly that her conviction seemed certain, particularly given the evidence of her long-term planning with Rob. The most satisfying aspect of the aftermath was watching Rob's complete financial and social collapse.
His arrest had been widely covered in local media, destroying his reputation in the insurance industry and making it impossible for him to continue his professional career. The man who had planned to profit from Mom's death found himself facing bankruptcy and imprisonment. But the deeper satisfaction came from understanding the brilliance of Mom's strategy. She had anticipated not just Rob's criminal intent but also his psychological weaknesses, his arrogance, his impatience, and his fundamental underestimation of the women in his life. Every element of her plan had been designed to exploit these flaws and turn them into instruments of his own destruction. The legal proceedings moved through the courts with unusual speed, partly because Rob's crimes had been so well documented that defense options were limited. His attorney attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, but the district attorney's office was confident enough in their evidence to insist on substantial prison time. During the trial, I testified about Rob's deception and manipulation, describing how he had convinced me that I was losing everything while actually stealing assets that belonged to me. The prosecutor used my testimony to illustrate the psychological cruelty of Rob's actions, showing how he had exploited my grief to facilitate his theft. Linda and other garden center employees testified about Rob's systematic looting of the business, providing detailed accounts of unauthorized sales, fraudulent vendor relationships, and intimidation tactics used against anyone who questioned his authority. Their testimony painted a picture of a man who had betrayed not just his family but also the employees and customers who had trusted him. The bank records and financial documents spoke for themselves, providing indisputable evidence of Rob's criminal activities. Expert witnesses explained the sophisticated nature of his fraud scheme, emphasizing the premeditation and planning that had gone into his systematic theft. Rob's conviction on multiple felony charges resulted in a 7-year prison sentence, effectively ending any possibility that he would profit from his crimes. The judge specifically noted the aggravating factors of exploiting a terminally ill spouse and manipulating a grieving stepdaughter, factors that influenced the severity of the sentence. Denise received a shorter sentence due to her cooperation with investigators and her lesser role in the overall scheme, but her conviction ensured that she would face significant consequences for her participation in the conspiracy. Her real estate career was permanently ended and her financial liability for the civil damages was substantial. The civil recovery process was equally successful. The court ordered full restitution of all stolen assets, plus interest and penalties that significantly exceeded the original theft amounts. Rob's personal assets were seized to satisfy these judgments, leaving him with nothing when he eventually completed his prison sentence. 6 months after the arrests, Kate's Garden Center was not only fully operational, but actually more successful than it had been before Mom's illness. The publicity surrounding the legal case had generated sympathy and interest from customers throughout the region, many of whom made special trips to support a business that had overcome such dramatic challenges. I had settled into the role of business owner with surprising comfort, discovering that my business education combined with years of observing Mom's management style had prepared me better than I had realized. The employees who had worked with Mom for years provided invaluable support and guidance, helping me understand the nuances of horticulture and customer service that couldn't be learned from textbooks. The house on Maple Grove Avenue became truly mine for the first time, no longer shared with someone whose presence had always felt temporary and conditional. I redecorated the spaces that Rob and Denise had occupied, removing all traces of their brief and unwelcome residence, while preserving the elements that reflected Mom's taste and personality. The most meaningful discovery came when I was cleaning out Mom's personal office, a small room adjacent to the master bedroom that she had used for her most private correspondence and planning. Hidden behind a file cabinet, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it, containing a final letter that she had written during her last week of life. The letter was different from the strategic documents she had prepared with Mr. Brennan, more personal and emotional, while still demonstrating the clarity of thought that had characterized her approach to the entire situation. She wrote about her pride in who I had become, and her confidence in who I would continue to be, regardless of the challenges that lay ahead. Victoria, she had written, if you're reading this letter, it means that my plan worked, and you've reclaimed everything that belonged to our family. But more importantly, it means that you've learned something about your own strength and capabilities that you might never have discovered under different circumstances. She went on to explain that the legal strategy she had created was as much about my personal development as it was about protecting assets. She had recognized that facing and overcoming Rob's betrayal would teach me lessons about resilience, strategic thinking, and self-reliance that would serve me throughout my life. The business I built was always meant to be yours, she continued, but I wanted you to earn it through your own intelligence and determination rather than simply inheriting it passively. Rob's greed provided the perfect opportunity for you to prove to yourself that you're capable of handling anything life might bring. The letter concluded with practical advice about running the garden center and personal encouragement about the future she envisioned for me. She had written it knowing that she would never see the results of her planning, but with complete faith that I would successfully navigate the challenges she was leaving behind. Reading her words, I understood that the entire ordeal had been designed not just to defeat Rob but to empower me. She had created circumstances that would require me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed, and to develop skills that would serve me for the rest of my life. A year after Mom's death, Kate's Garden Center had expanded into new services and markets that reflected my business education and my growing understanding of the industry. We had added an online sales platform, developed partnerships with landscape architects throughout the region, and even begun offering educational workshops for amateur gardeners. The success felt like a collaboration between Mom's vision and my implementation, honoring her legacy while adapting to changing market conditions and opportunities. The business had become truly mine through effort and achievement rather than simple inheritance, exactly as she had planned. Rob's appeals of his conviction were unsuccessful, and he remained in prison serving his full sentence. Occasional reports from mutual acquaintances suggested that he had never fully accepted responsibility for his crimes, continuing to blame others for the consequences of his own actions. His failure to learn from his experience seemed appropriate for someone who had consistently demonstrated poor judgment and moral blindness. The community had largely forgotten about the scandal, remembering Mom for her contributions to local horticulture and business rather than for the dramatic circumstances of her death. Kate's Garden Center had become synonymous with quality and expertise, building on the reputation she had established while adding new dimensions that reflected changing customer needs. My 23rd birthday, which marked the official transfer of all trust assets to my direct control, was celebrated quietly with Linda and the other employees who had supported me throughout the challenging transition period. The milestone felt less significant than the gradual process of earning their respect and proving my competence as their employer and leader. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that Mom's greatest gift hadn't been the business or the property she had protected, but the demonstration that intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle. She had faced terminal illness and family betrayal with strategic thinking and careful planning, creating victory from circumstances that seemed hopeless. The lessons she had taught me through her example would serve me far beyond the specific challenges Rob had created. I had learned to think several moves ahead, to document important decisions carefully, and to trust my own judgment even when others tried to manipulate or deceive me. Most importantly, I had learned that apparent weakness could be transformed into strategic advantage, that patience could be more powerful than confrontation, and that the people who underestimate others based on age or gender often create opportunities for those they dismiss to achieve total victory. The empty house that Rob had tried to steal had become a home filled with purpose and potential. The failing business he had attempted to liquidate had become a thriving enterprise that employed more people and served more customers than ever before. The grieving daughter he had tried to manipulate had become a successful businesswoman who honored her mother's memory through excellence and integrity. Standing in the garden center's main greenhouse, surrounded by the orchids that Mom had cultivated and Rob had tried to steal, I often thought about the elegant justice of her final plan. She had transformed betrayal into triumph, theft into growth, and apparent defeat into complete victory. The woman who had died believing in my potential had created the circumstances that allowed me to discover and develop capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Her faith in my future had become the foundation for achievements that exceeded even her expectations. Rob Carlson had entered our lives as a trusted partner and protector, but he had revealed himself to be a predator who saw opportunity in our vulnerability. His betrayal had been complete and calculated, designed to destroy everything Mom valued while enriching himself at our expense. But Mom had seen through his deception and planned accordingly, creating legal and financial structures that would protect our family's legacy while exposing his crimes. Her strategy had been flawless in its execution and devastating in its effectiveness. The man who had thought he was stealing from a helpless widow and her naive daughter had actually been dancing to the tune of the most sophisticated legal trap ever created by someone facing death. His greed had blinded him to the intelligence of the woman he was betraying, and the strength of the daughter he was trying to manipulate. In the end, Rob had lost everything he had tried to steal and everything he had legitimately possessed. His freedom, his reputation, his financial security, and his future had all been sacrificed in pursuit of assets that had never actually been within his reach. Mom's plan had achieved perfect justice, protecting the innocent, punishing the guilty, and ensuring that her legacy would continue through the daughter she had raised to be stronger and smarter than anyone expected. The garden center flourished under my management, the house provided shelter and comfort for years to come, and the lessons learned from overcoming betrayal would guide me through whatever challenges lay ahead. Catherine Hayes had won her final battle from beyond the grave, defeating enemies who had underestimated her intelligence and determination. Her victory was complete, her justice was perfect, and her legacy would endure through the business and the daughter she had protected through the most brilliant strategy of her remarkable life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.